Well, welcome everyone. How are we all doing? It's been a crazy 3 months.
Yeah.
Crazy. Good.
Well, welcome to our much delayed startup venture capital corporate conversation. Thank you all for joining. My name's Dana Lowell. I work at Faurecia. Faurecia is a big automotive supplier, one of the largest in the world, and we manufacture and supply components roughly to 1 out of 3 vehicles that get produced annually, headquartered in Paris. I work in the venture capital startup engagement, advanced development area for the company. And today I'm happy to be joined by some of my friends to talk about startups and corporates and venture capital and how we all make it work better than it currently is. So I'd like to take a moment here and I'll introduce, let my colleagues introduce themselves. Let's start with Steve Statler.
Hey everyone, my name's Steve Statler. I run the customer side of Wiliot, Wiliot's business. We're a cloud and semiconductor company that's making a computer the size of a postage stamp, which can power itself by harvesting radio frequency energy and can sense temperature and movement and talk securely over Bluetooth.
Bruno, how about you introduce yourself?
Yes, with pleasure. My name is Bruno. I'm based in London. I'm the founder of Hypersurfaces, which is an AI startup that makes this smart sensor that can transform literally any rigid object of any material, wood, glass, plastic, metal, and shape and size into what we call a data-enabled hypersurface, which is an object aware of any possible events that happen on its surface. So imagine walls, floors, appliances, car interiors, any physical product you imagine, able to understand how people are interacting with it through the power of vibrations and AI on a chip. So a technology that doesn't even need the internet, an internet connection in order to function.
Great, thank you. Mr. Swanson, how about you introduce yourself?
Phil Swanson. I work with Whirlpool's Advanced Development Innovation Organization. I've worked in Whirlpool across different innovation orgs for the last about 6 years. Started out launching products in our W Labs organization with a home brewing appliance. So I got to brew beer for about 2 years of my life, which seemed like I was cheating in corporate America. But right now, a lot of my work is focused on startup outreach and ecosystem outreach and helping Whirlpool accelerate their innovation efforts.
Thank you. And last but definitely not least, Camila.
Hi, everyone. I'm Camila. I'm a principal at Grand Ventures. Grand Ventures is a venture capital firm here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We invest in B2B SaaS companies across the US, especially emerging markets, emerging new hubs. So companies that are typically away from the typical saturated market like Silicon Valley, Boston, or New York City. So we have 12 portfolio companies today, and they're across the Midwest. We see a lot of deal flow in Colorado, Georgia, Texas, and even Toronto in Canada. So it's a pleasure to be here. Before Grand Ventures, I spent many years at GE Ventures, which is a corporate venture capital firm. And I think those two connections and experiences working with startups will be valuable for the discussion today.
Great, thank you. So just to start it off, we'll dig into the startup corporate venture thing in a second, but how's the last few months been for everybody? It's been total insanity. I know the automotive industry is shut down and is now just beginning to get back up. And I'm just usually every day working remote, 6 to 9 Zoom calls a day. trying to coordinate projects globally. How's everybody doing with this new normal?
It has been crazy. I think we all kind of got hit with this thing, and we're immediately trying to decide what it meant for us, and more importantly for our customers. And we found a range of situations. Wiliot's got customers that range from very large telcos to companies that make parts of cars and furniture and appliances, and we found the full mix for our customers. Some that were just completely on hold. Their business was going nowhere because people don't buy luggage these days, as an example. But others were busier than ever, and were just so crazy that we couldn't even get through to them. And then we had a whole set of customers, probably the majority, that were keeping on moving, but their business was changing. And we've been fortunate. What we do really helps make supply chains better. And so for that reason, we've continued to close deals, and our projects are moving forward. We now have to wear masks when we go on site, but I think we're one of the lucky ones.
Anybody else have any interesting stories about the last couple of months?
I can go next. I think from a venture capital perspective, we're lucky enough that we can work from home and not be as disrupted. It is a relationship type of business, and we get a lot of value by going to conferences, meeting with startups, and meeting with co-investors. So there's a huge change there. But we've been super busy. I think, as most venture capitalists would say, we spend a lot of time with our portfolio companies and really trying to make sense of all of this and trying to help them navigate the uncertainty that's coming up and we're living right now. So really revising the 2020 plan, building cash contingency plans, or even trying to find opportunities in this space right now, right? Like, there's a recession, yes, but there are industries and companies that will thrive. So how do we take opportunity of that? So spend a lot of time with that, but also from an internal perspective, just spending a lot of time rethinking about our reserves and how do we reserve more cash to support our portfolio companies when they need the startups. But we've been super busy. Like I said, some industries will thrive, and we've had a very busy second quarter. We made 3 new investments, 2 follow-ons. So it doesn't feel like it's slowed down for us yet, but yeah, it's a very interesting, crazy time for sure.
Bruno, Phil, I know, Phil, you've had an interesting adventure over the last couple of months. Maybe that'd be a good story to talk just a little bit about.
I mean, to start off, I was supposed to be visiting Bruno on the lawn at the end of February when this hit. My wife and I were actually about to board a plane to go house hunting in Milan for an expat assignment when we got the call to stand down. So it was pretty interesting. And so it's basically been locked in the house since then. Fortunately, about 2 weeks after that, I got pulled into a project, or found my way into a project that our CEO had asked one of our VP of technology, Christian Gianni, to lead, which was figuring out ways that we can help frontline healthcare workers with the PPE shortage. And so we quickly realized that N95 masks were in hot demand and in low supply. And we wanted to figure out how we could supply something to the front line without pulling from concurrent supply chains, right? So we could produce something completely separate from 3M and others. And we kind of backed ourselves into creating a powered air purified respirator. So the things that you put in your head and looks like you're in a science fiction movie. And we, in about the course of 7 weeks, went from a back of a hand sketch or back of a napkin sketch all the way to a NIOSH and FDA approved powered air purified respirator that we're now producing at scale. And it's very interesting. We actually set up a separate LLC that houses the business, and all of, kind of my experience on the startup side of the world and working in outside of the corporate structures has helped this, team, right? That's essentially how we've operated, right? We've operated almost as an internal startup that, didn't know what rules it couldn't break at that point. and it's really helped that team out. But a lot of those relationships that we've made through Seamless and others, kind of came through when we're looking for suppliers, when we're making contacts, and just kind of that hustle that comes with working inside of a startup or in a smaller organization. So that has been really interesting. So we have a couple work streams working like that, and it's really amazing what can be accomplished when the team has a really focused vision and kind of permission and to accomplish something. And now we're running into that where, hey, we've delivered about 3,000 to 4,000 units, and now we're looking for other customers. And then you realize how slow the sales cycle is on the medical side of the business, even amidst the pandemic. So we're sitting there saying, hey, we want to produce these things for a lot longer, but we need to also have that business be viable. So now we're in that early stage of a startup's life when you're trying to figure out, hey, what's that pivot that we need to make that keeps us alive for the next 6 to 8 weeks.
Great. And Bruno, how about you? How are you doing in the UK?
Well, to be honest, we kind of moved everybody, of course, working from home, but already half of our team was remote in LA and in Barcelona. And so all the people in London also started working remotely, and we kind of found ourselves actually working really well at home. And being, a software R&D startup actually has been really interesting, to know that we do not need to be in the office in order to work. And that I think, as many other companies are finding themselves now, we might actually not even go back to the office. So we're still going to have our lab, of course, for all the hardware projects, but in terms of development, we will probably so we learned a lot of advantages of basically working from home. So yeah, a big lesson learned.
I think a lot of companies are going to kind of go down that journey and try to figure out what's the best mix. So let's dig into this subject. Let's talk a little bit about the startup corporate collaboration venture capital space. So, it's historically been a really difficult journey to get the mutual win-win, very successful, friction-free engagement between corporate and startups. And, why is that so challenging? Maybe Steve, why don't you talk a little bit about, some of the challenges on startup corporate collaboration and, how do you make it work better? Steve, you're on mute there.
There's many reasons why they're challenging. The startups we're trying to get as lean and as agile as possible, and so our agenda is fast-paced innovation, high risk-taking, and of course, if you've got $1 billion business, you can't risk everything, and so you move at a slower pace. But at the same time, the people in the corporate world, they want some of those benefits without putting everything at risk. And for us, we have been very fortunate. People have been very excited about this vision of connecting things to the internet that you couldn't afford to connect before. Connect everything is our motto. And having a computer for pennies is compelling. But the unintended consequence was we were just getting we were drinking from a fire hose. There was a tsunami of interest, and we could be sending samples out to everyone and get nowhere, especially, large corporates. It's hard to divine whether you're talking to someone that's empowered or not. And so we basically moved to a consultative model where we are engaging with corporates with a package structured approach. We call it EAP, the Early Advantage Program. And we treat it like a consulting engagement where we define the scope and the objectives, and we have some predetermined success criteria, and we ask our customers to invest in that. So it's tens of thousands of dollars typically for the kinds of projects that we enable. And there was a lot of concern about it. When we first introduced it, it's we should be lucky that these large companies are talking to us. And I remember when we put up the first slide that outlined EAP and the design and the prototyping and the deployment phases that we had, and I was waiting to be laughed at, or certainly for people to be annoyed that we should be presumptuous enough to ask for these investments when we didn't even have a product yet. This was engagement pre-production. But the reverse has been true. So we now have over 20 of these EAP projects with some of the largest companies in the world, and it's allowed us to scale up the resources to do a better job of working with corporates, and it's really driving everything that we do. It drives our roadmap. It drives the way we produce, the way we sell, and also our partner ecosystem has really flourished because we can point to these customers that we have, even though we don't have a finished product. And it shows a level of commitment that brings in the partners that are required to build full solutions. So for us, it's worked well.
Phil, you and I have engaged with Wiliot and obviously many other startups as part of the Seamless platform. I mean, what's typically, some of the challenges you see from Whirlpool's side on your classic engagement with startups, and what are the issues and what are some ways that you can get through some of those issues?
I would say the classic issue when you have corporates that want to engage with startups is it's a lot of innovation theater, right? So what ends up happening is companies talk to a lot of startups without actually doing much else than that. So they get a reputation for talking to everybody and never pushing product out or never bringing anybody else along to an actual piece of production. And it comes from the lack of alignment internally within the organization, saying, hey, these are our strategic imperatives. These are where we have gaps. And this is, kind of what our mentality is. So having a portfolio view of, what are those short-term opportunities that we need capabilities to kind of fit a hole or fit a niche, or, what are those long-term investments that we're looking to do that might be atypical of what a corporate usually does. So maybe the CVC side. And then really making that really external to the startups you're working with in the initial conversation. So understanding what the startup wants and understanding what you can provide and what you're looking for on the corporate side, without leading them too far down kind of a rabbit hole. Because it doesn't do the startup any good if you lead them along for 6 to 8 months and then never end up supporting them in any way, whether it be through a POC or any other type of engagement. And then on the startup side, it doesn't do any good to kind of overinflate, what your capabilities are, because it'll be, it becomes very apparent as soon as you do engage. And so when you do have that mix, worst case scenario, you have a corporate that leads people on forever, and then you have a startup that's maybe a little iffy on what their technology is. You can get a year down the road without anything ever coming to fruition. Whereas I think what Wiliot's done is a great example of getting the right engagement early on and being transparent about what their capabilities are, but then also transparent of what the corporate wants and what they can provide. But again, the biggest challenge is kind of that internal bureaucracy too. So what happens when you identify a good startup? What then happens? What's that process? And so making sure there's actual alignment inside the organization on how to actually understand what makes a good opportunity, and then when to identify when to cut losses. Because there's nothing corporates are more famous for than keeping zombie projects alive for way too long.
Good. What when on the startup side, how does a startup decide it's the right corporate when you're looking at the opportunities that come into your flow into your organization? I mean, how does a startup decide, hey, this is the right corporate? Is it, are you looking for cash flow, or are you looking for technical maturity, or how are you screening on the opportunities that come to you from the startup side? Maybe Bruno, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Right. In our case, it's definitely having some evidence, some feeling that the time to market is actually not too long, because being a startup, we can all wait 4, 5, 6 years in order to benefit from some kind of commercialization of the projects that we work on. So some history and some evidence that the company culture is towards actually innovate through startups. That definitely help and is one of the criteria. But really, like in our story, like for the past 2 years, we've been working on like a one-to-one kind of project, and we understood that it was just too risky for us, basically, to invest a lot of resources in one corporate at the time, because the variables are just too many. So the approach that we took has been actually to move from a POC kind of ad hoc development kind of model to try to develop a platform of our technology that can enable the corporates themselves to experiment with our technology as independent as possible from us, and then we just try to charge on basically support that we provide. But obviously the idea is to be able then to not have to choose which corporates to work with, but like try to work with as many as possible in parallel.
So what I asked this to Steve and Bruno, what drives you most crazy about your dealings with corporates? Because I know both of you deal with many corporates out there across multiple sectors. So I'm just curious, what drives you crazy when you deal with a corporate group?
In my case, is what feels sad is exactly that kind of not understanding if the internal alignment is actually there, or if the person that you speak to, so the open innovation, the head of open innovation typically is actually aligned with the people that actually have some need, or it's just like try to bring forward like zombie projects, like Phil says, for the sake of it. So it's exactly that. It's kind of trying to understand, like sometimes it's hard to know if there is a real need versus just the desire of working with startups just because of some buzzword, in their portfolio, basically. And that's really hard to do. I mean, I don't have a secret weapon to understand this yet.
One thing I would add from a venture capital perspective, and part of the reason why venture capitalists are a little cautious about this relationship between the startup and a big corporation, is twofold. One is the distraction for the startup, and also the differing importance of the relationship. So if you think about the relationship, startups are typically small, not a large team. But that relationship, if it works with the corporation, it's super important for the startup. So they deploy a lot of resources, not just capital, but like a lot of people on the product team and the development team, typically a lot of executives, because it's the relationship's important. So the CEO is the one trying to manage the relationship. And at the end of the day, you're using all of those resources into, investing in one basket, and instead of going and trying to expand to other opportunities as well. And to Phil's point earlier is sometimes if 8 months goes by and you guys try to make something work, but if something doesn't work, now what? That startup just invested all of those resources into this one opportunity that didn't really come into fruition. And now they're going to run out of cash, but they didn't make as much progress. So then that raise is not going to be as attractive and as successful if they had pursued multiple different opportunities. So that's kind of where we sit, when we're trying to navigate that relationship and help the startups. Because multiple times the relationship is super important for the startup. It's key for the startup. But for the corporate, it's a side project. Or even if it's not necessarily a side project, or even if it's something that hey, it's a really cool technology that could drive future sales or a cool product, it's still a very small percentage of their financials, of their results. So that's the big difference there that we try to navigate with our portfolio companies.
So Camila, I mean, that's really good points. I mean, so how do you counsel your startups on the CVC versus VC thing and avoid having them get so dependent on not only the POC development stuff, but also the funding side that a corporate brings and get distracted? I mean, how do you counsel them? And, you know, what advice do you give a startup that's trying to raise money and weigh those options in terms of what they're dealing with?
Yeah, a great question. As far as, I mean, I guess the trade-offs, right, from VC or CVC, I think, let me start with the VCs, because that one is easier. So for a VC perspective, this is what we do. Our core business is to invest in startups and help them grow so that they can exit at a higher valuation. The key here is that our goals are most likely aligned with the goals of the startup, which is also to continue to grow and become more valuable and have an exit that is great for everybody. So there is this alignment in goals between the VC and startup. When you bring a corporate VC to the table, they have great points and great aspects for a corporate venture capital firm to invest in a company. One is the technical expertise. They, especially when the corporate VC is a leader in the space, they have all the knowledge, the go-to-market, the partnerships, everything you need to truly understand that market. And in partnering with that VC, the corporate venture capital firm, is super important for the startup. But then, and then that can expand in other aspects too, because corporations have resources in all different functions. And as a startup, if you get that investment, they're gonna help you get access to any resources that you want, right? So that's a great side of the corporate venture capital firm. The risk here is that corporate venture capital firms, they're short-lived because any change on the environment, but like on the ecosystem could change how they pursue or do new investments. So for example, a change in leadership could change the corporate venture capital firm, and they might not be doing new investments, or they might completely stop investing. Or a change like right now, COVID, right? It's a major change in the market. And again, because this is not necessarily their core business, this becomes secondary. This gets pushed to the bottom of their priority list. So we have multiple corporate VCs that are not investing at the moment because they're waiting for this downturn to calm down, to get more certainty in the market and all of that. So what we tell our portfolio companies is that it's good to thrive. If you're trying to build a good cap table, it's good to thrive for a balanced cap table. You want to have a little bit of both. I mean, if you are a super deep tech corporate startup that need that tech expertise, it is interesting to have a leader in your space of that corporate venture capital firm that is representing you on your, it's in your cap table, because that gives a lot of tech validation. Other investors, when they see that, they're going to say, wow, that's interesting. X, Y, and Z thought that this technology is interesting enough to stay engaged, to invest in this company. And that tells a lot. That increases their valuation. But it's also important to have other VCs, the traditional VCs, that are going to support your business no matter what happened on the overall market. So that's the one thing I would say, aiming for a balance, and then trying to pick the good corporate venture capital firms. I think from a corporate venture capital firm, the two things that I try to see is, one is are they independent from the larger corporations? Are they making the decisions that are not necessarily attached to the business unit and a day-to-day of the business unit? So that way they can move faster. There's less bureaucracy. And how are they compensated? A lot of times, the corporate venture capital group is compensated by that strategic relationship that is established between the firm and the startup. But if they are compensated also financially, though that group of the corporate venture capital firm will really help the company grow independently if a co-development, a partnership comes to fruition or not, because they want that company to be successful regardless if there is a relationship with the headquarters, for example.
Good. Yeah, I think that the on-balance sheet, off-balance sheet thing is kind of a key driver because it's resilience of the funding. I mean, the off-balance sheet stuff is basically cash reserves that can be diverted to other sources. Steve, you've taken money from both strategics and venture firms. I mean, what's your experience? I think you're on mute.
I am. I have dogs, so I'm trying to not expose
Yeah,
that conversation.
okay. I got a big one here too.
So we have both. Yeah, we have Grove, Norwest Venture Partners, 83 North, Vintage as our VC investors. And then on the corporate side, it's Amazon, Alibaba, Samsung, Qualcomm, Docomo, Maersk, Avery Dennison, Verizon, and PepsiCo. And it's been really helpful to have that balance. We've been able to tap into the domain knowledge. We're a chip company and a cloud company, and we've been able to dip into the knowledge of those VCs. One thing I would say is you can't take for granted, just because you've got an investor in a company, there are some walls between the venture firm and the rest of the firm. And the rest of the firm, especially in very large companies, they may not have a huge interest in supporting the venture team. They may see them as not necessarily being aligned with their goals. The operational teams want to get stuff done, not to make the venture team successful. We've been very lucky. We've got introductions and sponsorship from all of our corporate investors, but you do see there are differences between one company and another, and some of them are just incredibly engaged and energetic, and others will make some great introductions, but it's basically up to you to lead your own path. So it does tell a story. I mean, we just because it's a big brand that's interested in you, I think I'm very conscious of the story that we give to our customers based on who our investors are. And you have to think about, we sell to retailers, and we have some companies that invest in us that maybe the retailers have a concern about it. But on balance, I think the companies that have invested in Wiliot have been a huge plus on both sides of that spectrum that you've described.
Great. Now, Phil, you've got investing at Whirlpool. How integrated, or is it integrated in startup activity and feeding you, innovation tech for your next product?
Yeah, so Whirlpool's investing history is more along lines of traditional M&A activity, right? So looking at large corporate acquisitions to expand market share, market cap, those types of things. We have done some strategic investments before, but again, it's very large. And the most recent example of us investing, I guess, would be our acquisition of Youngly, which was about now 4 years ago. And looking at that from a strategic perspective, looking at how does that amplify our space in the home and really give us a digital capability that we were lacking at the time. And so, to say that we have an investment arm that's kind of feeding us technology or feeding us technologies and information, the way that we operate now on the open innovation side is it's kind of the reverse, right? We would be feeding those opportunities up to the M&A or to the venture side, which again isn't anything official. I think it's more what you mentioned, Dan, is that it's off balance sheet type activity, right? Or it's something that would be looking like something that would be a more traditional M&A acquisition versus having a VC arm, which would be it's something that Whirlpool's toiled with and dipped our toes in. We're part of some funds of funds, but in terms of actual activity, from the CVC side, that's not something we've partake in for officially.
Okay, so we talked about we've talked about a lot of subjects here. So now you've got you've got a magic wand, and you can make this collaboration work perfectly between CVC and VC and startup and corporates. I mean, what do you think we need to do here? What are some of the solutions or the platforms or collaboration models we need to put together to get this to work in a much more effective manner? And Bruno, you've been quiet for a little while. I'll throw that to you and give us some thoughts, and let everybody kind of chip in on this a little bit.
Yeah, it's a hard question. I'm not sure how. I think probably ideally more transparency from the corporate world of what the strategic goals are and whether they really match the the collaboration that they have with the startup, like some disclosure of the strategic goals, probably something like that. That's a hard one, isn't it? So,
I mean, I know, and Phil, you can probably comment on this too, but we've tried with the Seamless platform to have the multiple corporates provide a shared platform that we can do the technology experiment, and it provides obviously benefit, low friction for the corporates to look at that experiment and that technology and that team behind the startup. And hopefully it also helps the startup that they get to look at 3 or 4 industrial sectors simultaneously to give them better, pathway or vision on what's the most promising route or technology or industrial sector in terms of pursuit. I've from a distance and obviously with engagement, I've really admired the Wiliot program, and I think that the EAP program that Steve mentioned earlier is a really good example in terms of kind of a more rigorous from the startup to the corporate saying, here's my formula for engagement. And I think that helps a lot. I don't know, Phil, I mean, obviously you see a lot of startups. I mean, is there anything unique in terms of either a tech platform that's out there or a startup engagement model that has been compelling to you? Camila, I don't know, maybe you have a thought also.
I don't know, from the corporate side, it feels like my inbox is filled every other day with a new platform that promises, to connect us with startups or connect us with VC or connect us in some way with this community. And I think really, what I found and even working with Dana and everybody here, is that you can't really replace with technology, but those interpersonal relationships, but also then the trusting of expertise. And I think that's where something like Seamless and this having a good network, really becomes extremely fruitful, right? If I'm sitting there and I'm myself using a CB Insights or a PitchBook or something, and I'm just trying to curate through a bunch of startups and figure out who to talk to, I mean, that's not going to work very well, right? I don't have enough domain expertise. I haven't talked to these companies. So what's the first thing I'm going to do? I'm going to go and reach out to my network, for, hey, have you talked to this company? Have you worked with them before? And the benefit, again, of something like Seamless or a platform where interaction is a key part of it is it's really easy to have that safe space to share information. And again, that's part of where, when I see some of the accelerators and incubators, with companies that come from very diverse backgrounds, and they tend to work better than ones where it's very competitive in nature, right? And it's, again, innovation at an arm's length instead of actually having people in there working with the startups, understanding who they are. And again, I think that's, I don't know, Camila could probably talk a little more about, what you guys do to engage and trust and vet. But on our side, it's been interesting to me to have sometimes I'll be brought in to give my perspective on a potential partnership that is maybe a more traditional supplier engagement, or the startup was brought to them by somebody and now they're having me look at it. And having done this so many times, Dan, I'm sure you run into this too, is as soon as you look at a pitch deck and then maybe you have that first interaction, that first pass of, is this startup worth its salt, or is this startup worth pursuing, is much different. My interpretation is much different than somebody who hasn't had that experience or hasn't, sat through, hundreds, if not thousands of pitch meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Camila, you would have you got a CVC, VC background, and what are your thoughts on how to get this corporate startup and work better?
When we see one of our portfolio companies engaging or starting to work into a collaboration or a co-development project or whatever it is with a large corporation, I think one of the things that we try to make sure is that that corporation have some stake in the game. A lot of times, especially if it's a very early startup, they want to do pilots, and sometimes they try to do like free pilots because anything could help. They wanted to make it work. They wanted to prove the technology with the corporate. But sometimes putting your foot down and making sure that, yes, we're going to do a pilot or whatever it is, but let's make sure that there's a stake in the game here where you're going to pay for this. Or you're going to have a project leader that will be engaging or will be dedicating this much of his or her time to this project, just to make sure that there is as much as possible engagement from their end, and there's some commitment from the corporate standpoint, which I don't know if it always solve. It might not. Maybe you guys' cases are always paid and it's still, run through multiple challenges. But I think that's like one of the steps that we try to take, like, okay, how are they really engaging on this? And then when we think about the project itself, how can we make sure that we're removing as much dependency, as much reliability from the corporation? Like I said, the corporation has so many different things on their plate. They're working in so many different projects. they need to report earnings or whatever it is. So if we could, when you're drafting that project plan, if there's a way to do it where you remove as many dependencies from their decision-making process, you will probably make your life slightly easier. So that's what we try to navigate our startups to make sure that the relationship's a little more seamless in that sense.
Great. So we're running low on time here, so I'll just finish up with one question for everybody. So we've been in the COVID world for 3 months now, and where do you think we're going to be 3 months from now? Not as it relates to COVID, but as it relates to corporate startup engagement. I mean, any big changes, and what are your thoughts?
Well, I hope that the seamless consortium model grows, and I think it should do for multiple reasons. I mean, I'm biased. We're the recipient, and we're engaged with that. But as a startup, when you look at the companies that you're engaged with, they can fall on a spectrum of very operational to very, very innovative. And if they're very operational, then the challenges are dealing potentially with a huge bureaucracy, lots and lots of paperwork, and very, slow process. But you're actually engaging with an organization that can put what you're doing into production. On the innovation side, the friction is super low, and potentially you're looking a lot further out. but you aren't guaranteed that what you're doing is actually relevant to the core business. And I think by having a consortium, you end up normalizing that, and you also answer one of the other challenges that that startups have, which Bruno talked about, which is focus versus diversification. You can only have so many relationships that are meaningful with big corporates. And with one relationship, you know, we have this, we have one relationship with Seamless, but as a result of that, we have a relationship with Whirlpool, with Faurecia, with Steelcase, with Bissell. And so I think as corporations are wanting to spend smart, as we all are because of COVID, then I'm optimistic that this is a model that's going to grow.
How about you, Bruno?
Yeah, well, I think that with this big crisis, I hope is going to turn into a clear appetite for innovation in very specific sectors, and I expect a lot of corporates to cut a little bit, like all the unnecessary, you know, kind of projects, and actually focus much more on what is really going to help them. And by having to do so, being even more clear with startups, so that the relationship becomes a mutual benefit. So I hope that is gonna help in some cases, and in some other cases it's just gonna kill the bullshit basically. So I hope.
Phil, what are your thoughts?
So I listened to an interesting podcast the other day. Kara Swisher interviewed Brian Chesky from Airbnb about the last 9 weeks of their company and what he and his management team did to be open and honest about the realities of the business and what they did when they realized they're going to have to cut 25% of their workforce, right? Oh. But with that, they had an alignment with what is the vision and purpose of Airbnb, getting back to what makes them different than everybody else and what they bring to the world. And my hope, from a corporate side, is that a lot of our leadership and our corporate entities can kind of have that same come to Jesus kind of realization of what is it really that we want to be as corporates, instead of kind of putting our hands in all these different pots. And I firmly believe that those that continue to invest and double down on innovation through the downturn and through this crisis are going to be the ones that are the strongest. That's where you look at the Amazon and the Googles and others of the world who have a ton of capital and have a lot of certainty around who they are. They're going to be able to invest and kind of scoop up a ton of valuable assets during this time, and they're just going to get stronger. And so then the others that are looking to save the core business without adapting and potentially pivoting to new lines of revenue and new markets and new opportunities, those are the ones that I fear are going to kind of suffer as much. So my hope is that corporates continue to invest in the downturn and use their ability and what makes them unique to adapt versus just stay the course.
Thanks, Camila. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, just from a VC perspective or corporate VC perspective, I think my hope is aligned with what Phil is saying. I hope the corporate venture capital firms see that, like many other VCs are doing, business continues as usual. What are the segments, what are the industries that are going to thrive, not just now, but post-COVID? So if they pay attention to that, if they start looking at those trends, they will find opportunities to invest as well. So hopefully that's the approach that they take and continue activities and continue to be active because it's important. It's really important to have the corporate and startup world connected. So.
Great. Well, hey, I want to thank all of you guys. I mean, you're like four of my favorite people, and I mean, it's really been an honor doing a panel with you guys, and I hope I get to see you in person soon. But thank you. Stay healthy and talk soon. Bye.